In a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in the suburbs of Chicago, 78-year-old Mildred Johnson lived a peaceful and unassuming life. Her days were filled with simple pleasures, tending to her garden, reading books by the window, and occasionally, chatting with neighbors who admired her warm smile and gentle demeanor. Mildred had spent decades working as a nurse before retiring, but few people in the area knew about her remarkable past. She was one of the first Black women to serve in the U.S. Army during World War II, a fact she kept tucked away like an old photograph in a dusty album. To her neighbors, she was just Mildred, the kind elderly woman who always waved hello. But beneath her calm exterior, Mildred carried the weight of memories that most could barely imagine. She remembered the cold stares and whispered insults. When she joined the military, the way some soldiers refused to salute her because of the color of her skin. Despite it all, she had persevered, earning respect through hard work and determination. Now, years later, she preferred to focus on the present, finding joy in the little things, a blooming flower, a good cup of tea, or the laughter of children playing down the street. It wasn't that she had forgotten her struggles. She simply chose not to dwell on them. One sunny afternoon, Mildred decided to walk to the corner store for groceries. The air was warm, carrying the sweet scent of freshly cut grass. Birds chirped cheerfully overhead as she strolled along the sidewalk, her reusable tote bag swinging gently at her side. Everything seemed normal until she passed a group of young men loitering near the entrance of the store. They leaned against a parked car, laughing loudly and cracking jokes. At first, Mildred paid them no mind. She'd encountered plenty of rowdy groups in her lifetime and usually found it easier to ignore them. But something felt different this time. As she walked closer, their laughter faded, replaced by hushed whispers. One of the men nudged another and pointed in her direction. Mildred quickened her pace slightly, hoping to avoid any trouble. Still, she couldn't help overhearing fragments of their conversation. "Look at her," one said mockingly. "What's she even doing here?" Another chimed in with a cruel laugh. "Yeah, she doesn't belong in this neighborhood." Mildred's chest tightened, but she forced herself to keep walking. She reminded herself that ignorance was often louder than intelligence. Maybe if she ignored them, they'd lose interest. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. As she reached the store's entrance, one of the men stepped into her path, blocking her way. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a smug grin plastered across his face. "Hey, Grandma," he sneered. "You lost or something?" For a moment, Mildred froze. Her mind raced, searching for the right words to defuse the situation. But before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Leave her alone," someone shouted from inside the store. An older man stood near the door glaring at the group. The young man hesitated, then backed off, muttering under his breath. Mildred nodded gratefully to the stranger and hurried. Inside, her heart pounding, she finished her shopping quickly, eager to get home. But as she stepped back outside, the group was still there, waiting. This time, they weren't content to let her pass unnoticed. One of the men grabbed her grocery bag, spilling its contents onto the ground. Apples rolled across the pavement, and a carton of eggs smashed open. "Oops," he said with a smirk, earning chuckles from his friends. Mildred bent down to pick up her belongings, her hands trembling with anger and humiliation. "Why don't you go back where you came from?" another man jeered. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. For a brief second, she considered standing up to them, drawing on the strength she'd learned in the army. But looking at their menacing faces, she realized it wouldn't end well. Instead, she clutched her bag tightly and hurried toward her house, tears streaming down her cheeks. The men followed her, shouting insults and kicking her scattered groceries as she went. By the time she reached her front gate, her legs felt weak and her breath came in ragged gasps. She fumbled with her keys, desperate to unlock the door before they caught up. Finally, she managed to slip inside and slam the door shut, leaning against it as her knees gave out. Outside, the men pounded on the wood, yelling threats and laughing cruelly. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, watching silently as the scene unfolded. Not one of them stepped forward to help. Mildred sat on the floor, clutching her chest as sobs racked her body. She had faced racism countless times throughout her life, but this felt different. These men weren't just hateful, they were dangerous. And what hurt the most was the silence of her neighbors. How could they stand by and do nothing? For years, she had believed in the goodness of people, even after enduring prejudice and discrimination. But now, sitting alone in her living room, she wondered if she had been wrong. As the adrenaline began to fade, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She thought about the young woman she used to be, the soldier who had marched into battle despite overwhelming odds. That same fire still burned inside her, buried beneath decades of patience and grace. Slowly, she rose to her feet and wiped her tears. She wasn't going to let fear win. Not today. With shaking hands, Mildred picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" it said gruffly. Mildred took a deep breath and steadied her voice. "Jim," she said firmly. "It's Mildred. I need your help." There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Mildred, what's wrong?" Jim asked, concern evident in his tone. Mildred explained everything, the attack, the insults, the indifference of her neighbors. As she spoke, her voice grew stronger, fueled by a mix of anger and resolve. When she finished, Jim didn't hesitate. "Don't worry, Mildred," he said. "We'll take care of this." With those words, Mildred felt a wave of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. Her old squad, the people who had stood by her side during the war, would come to her aid once again. And together, they would show these cowards what true strength looked like. After hanging up the phone, Mildred sat in silence for a moment, her mind racing. She glanced at the old photograph hanging on her living room wall, a black and white image of her squad from World War II. In the picture, she stood tall and confident, surrounded by men and women who had become her family during those difficult years. They came from different backgrounds, spoke with different accents, and worshipped in different ways, but they shared one thing, an unshakable bond forged in the heat of battle. Now, decades later, that bond was about to be tested once again, Thierry. The other end of the line, Colonel James Jim Thompson hung up the phone with a heavy heart. At 92 years old, he wasn't the spry young officer he used to be, but his sense of duty remained as strong as ever. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the rolling hills of his Virginia farm. Memories flooded his mind. Long nights spent strategizing, dangerous missions executed under enemy fire, and the camaraderie that had kept them all going. Mildred's voice echoed in his ears, trembling, yet determined. She needed him, and he wouldn't let her down. Jim didn't waste any time. He grabbed his cane and shuffled to his desk, where he kept a list of contact information for his former squad members. Over the years, they had stayed loosely connected through letters and occasional reunions, but this was different. This wasn't nostalgia or reminiscing, it was urgent. Jim picked up the phone and began making calls, his tone firm and commanding despite his age. "We've got a situation," he told each person. "Mildred needs us." The response was immediate. Maria Alvarez, the sharp-witted medic who had patched up countless soldiers during the war, was the first to answer. Though now, in her late 80s, she still ran a small clinic in New Mexico. When Jim explained what had happened, Maria didn't hesitate. "I'll be there tomorrow morning," she said without missing a beat. "No one messes with our girl and gets away with it." Next, Jim called Harold Peterson, a towering man who had been responsible for maintaining tanks and vehicles during the war. Harold lived in Texas these days, running a repair shop and mentoring young mechanics. Despite his gruff exterior, he had always been fiercely protective of his squad. "Tell me where to go," Harold said, his voice gravelly but resolute. "I'll bring my tools and my fists if necessary." Finally, Jim reached Tommy Hayes, the squad's joker and quick thinker. Tommy had settled in Florida after the war, working as a teacher and coach. Known for his humor and charm, he was also the kind of guy you wanted on your side, in a fight. When Jim filled him in, Tommy chuckled darkly. "Those punks have no idea who they're messing with," he said. "Text me Mildred's address, I'll catch the next flight." Within hours, plans were set in motion. Maria packed a small bag and arranged for a neighbor to cover her clinic. Harold closed his shop early, explaining vaguely to customers that he had urgent business. Tommy booked a red-eye flight, leaving behind a note for his students that simply read, "Family emergency." Meanwhile, Jim coordinated logistics, ensuring everyone knew their roles. By sunrise the next day, the squad was converging on Mildred's neighborhood. When Mildred opened her front door the following morning, she couldn't believe her eyes. There they were, her old comrades, standing shoulder to shoulder like a wall of strength. Jim led the group, leaning heavily on his cane but radiating authority. Behind him stood Maria, her wiry frame belying her toughness. Harold, whose massive build made him look like a retired football player, and Tommy, flashing his trademark grin even in such a serious moment. For a brief second, Mildred forgot how to speak. Her throat tightened and tears welled up in her eyes. "Surprise," Jim said gruffly, though his own eyes glistened with emotion. "We heard you needed backup." Mildred threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. Then she turned to the others, embracing each one in turn. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, though her smile said otherwise. "This is too much." "Nonsense," Maria replied, patting her gently on the back. "You think we'd let some punk kids push you around? Not a chance." Harold nodded in agreement. "Besides," he added with a wry grin, "we owe you. You saved my sorry butt more times than I can count." Tommy laughed, lightening the mood. "Yeah. And now? It's payback time. So where are these clowns?" Mildred led them inside, where they gathered around her kitchen table. The room felt smaller with so many people, but it was filled with warmth and purpose. She recounted the events of the previous day, her voice steady despite the lingering pain. As she spoke, her friends listened intently, their expressions growing, darker with each detail. When she finished, Jim slammed his fist on the table, startling everyone. "This ends now," he declared. "No one attacks one of ours and walks away unpunished." Maria pulled out a notebook and began jotting down notes. "Do you remember what they looked like?" she asked. "Any distinguishing features?" Mildred nodded. "One of them had a tattoo on his neck, a snake. Another wore a red baseball cap, and the leader, he was taller than the rest with blonde hair." Harold cracked his knuckles. "Good. That gives us something to work with." Tommy leaned forward, his playful demeanor replaced by seriousness. "What about the neighbors? Did anyone see what happened?" "They watched," Mildred admitted bitterly. "But no one helped. No one said a word." Jim sighed, shaking his head. "That's almost worse than the attack itself. But don't worry, we'll handle it." The squad spent the next hour devising a plan. Maria suggested reaching out to local authorities, while Harold proposed setting up surveillance to catch the attackers in the act. Tommy volunteered to talk to the neighbors, hoping to rally support and gather additional information. Jim took charge of coordinating everything, his military training kicking in as he assigned tasks and timelines. As they worked, Mildred watched them with a mixture of awe and gratitude. These were people who had fought wars, faced death, and endured unimaginable hardships, all for the sake of freedom and justice. And now, they were here, ready to fight for her. It was humbling, overwhelming, and empowering all at once. By mid-afternoon, the squad had mobilized. Maria accompanied Mildred to the police station, where they filed a formal report and provided detailed descriptions of the attackers. The officers seemed surprised to see such a formidable group backing Mildred's case, and their attitudes shifted noticeably. One detective promised to prioritize the investigation, sensing that this wasn't a typical case. Meanwhile, Harold and Tommy canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors and speaking to residents. At first, many were reluctant to get involved, citing fear of retaliation or indifference. But Tommy's charm and Harold's imposing presence eventually broke through their defenses. A few neighbors admitted to witnessing the attack and agreed to provide statements. Others pledged to keep an eye out for suspicious activity. Back at Mildred's house, Jim oversaw the operation from the living room, using his phone to stay in constant contact with the team. Though physically frail, his mind remained sharp, and his leadership inspired everyone around him. By evening, they had gathered enough evidence to make significant progress. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, the squad reconvened at Mildred's dining table. Exhausted but satisfied, they reviewed their findings and discussed next steps. Mildred joined them, feeling a renewed sense of hope. For the first time since the attack, she realized she wasn't powerless. With her squad by her side, she could face anything. "We've got this," Jim said firmly, raising a glass of water and a makeshift toast. "For Mildred, for justice, for all of us." The others cheered, their voices echoing through the house. Outside, the world might still be full of hatred and cruelty, but inside, love and solidarity reigned supreme. And in that moment, Mildred knew they would prevail. Not just for her, but for everyone who deserved to live free from fear. The next morning, the squad gathered around Mildred's kitchen table once again, armed with coffee mugs and a renewed sense of purpose. The events of the previous day had energized them, but they knew there was still much to be done. Justice wasn't just about catching the attackers. It was about sending a message to the entire community that hate would not go unchallenged. As sunlight streamed through the windows, Jim leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly on the table. "All right, team," he began, his voice gravelly but commanding. "We've got the police working on their end and we've talked to some neighbors, but we need to do more than just wait for results. This isn't just Mildred's fight, it's ours. And it's time we show this neighborhood who we are." Maria nodded in agreement, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "People need to see that racism doesn't just hurt one person, it hurts everyone. If we don't stand together now, nothing will change." Harold crossed his arms, his massive frame making the chair creak under his weight. "So what's the plan? We can't exactly march into the streets like we're back in uniform." Tommy grinned mischievously, leaning back in his chair. "Why not? I mean, sure, we're not as young as we used to be, but let's face it, we're legends. People should know our story. Maybe it'll make them think twice before acting like cowards." Mildred, who had been quietly observing the discussion, finally spoke up. Her voice was soft but firm. "If you want to tell my story, or all of your stories, you have my blessing. But remember, this isn't about revenge. It's about showing people that hate has consequences." Jim smiled faintly at her words. "That's right. Revenge won't fix anything, but education might. Let's organize a meeting, a public event where we can share our experiences and remind everyone why tolerance matters." The idea quickly gained traction. Maria suggested holding the meeting at the local community center, a spacious venue often used for town hall discussions. Tommy volunteered to design flyers and posters, using his charm to persuade local businesses to help spread the word. Harold offered to oversee logistics, ensuring everything ran smoothly on the day of the event. Meanwhile, Jim took charge of drafting speeches, drawing on decades of leadership experience to craft messages that would resonate with the audience. Over the next few days, the squad worked tirelessly to prepare. They divided responsibilities, each member contributing in their own unique way. Maria reached out to local schools and churches, asking leaders to encourage attendance. Harold enlisted the help of a few retired friends to set up chairs and audio equipment at the community center. Tommy plastered the neighborhood with colorful flyers that read, "Join us, a night of courage, unity, and justice." The response was overwhelming. By the evening of the event, nearly 100 people had RSVP'd, eager to hear what the veterans had to say. On the night of the meeting, the community center buzzed with anticipation. Residents filled the rows of folding chairs, chatting quietly, among themselves. Some had come out of curiosity, while others were driven by guilt or fear after witnessing Mildred's attack. Local reporters also showed up, cameras in hand, intrigued by the sudden influx of World War II veterans in their small suburb. When the squad entered the room, led by Jim and flanked by Mildred, the crowd fell silent. The sight of these elderly men and women dressed neatly in suits and dresses commanded respect. Their presence alone was a testament to resilience and courage. Jim stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone to accommodate his height. For a moment, he simply stood there, surveying the audience with piercing eyes. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Many of you may be wondering why we're here tonight. Let me start by introducing ourselves. My name is Colonel James Thompson, and I served in the United States Army during World War II. Beside me are members of my squad, people who risked their lives so that others could live free from tyranny." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This isn't about politics or agendas. It's about humanity. Just last week, one of our own, a decorated veteran named Mildred Johnson, was attacked in broad daylight because of the color of her skin. She was harassed, humiliated, and left to fend for herself while bystanders did nothing. Does that sound like freedom to you?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, and several heads bowed in shame. Jim continued, his tone growing firmer. "We didn't fight Nazis overseas only to let hatred win here at home. Racism isn't just an individual problem, it's a societal failure. And if we don't address it, it will destroy us all." As Jim stepped aside, Maria took the stage. Her petite frame belied her fierce determination as she addressed the audience. "I'm Maria Alvarez," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "During the war, I treated soldiers injured in battle, men and women of every race and creed. I saw firsthand how prejudice weakens us. When we judge someone based on their skin color, we lose sight of what truly matters: character, kindness, and unity." She turned to Mildred, who sat near the front, and gestured for her to join her. Mildred hesitated briefly before rising to her feet and walking to the podium. For years, she had avoided talking about her military service, preferring to keep those memories private. But tonight was different. Tonight she felt compelled to speak not just for herself but for anyone who had ever been made to feel less than human. "I joined the army because I wanted to serve my country," she began, her voice trembling, slightly at first. "But when I arrived, I realized that being a soldier wasn't enough. I had to prove myself every single day, to earn respect, to show that I belonged. Even then, I faced discrimination from people who thought I didn't deserve to wear the uniform." Her words grew stronger as she recounted the recent attack, describing how the men had mocked her, stolen her groceries, and left her feeling powerless. "For a moment, I wondered if I had wasted my life fighting for a world that hadn't changed. But then I remembered something important. I'm not alone. These people," she gestured to her squad behind her, "reminded me that love and solidarity are stronger than hate. Together, we can make a difference." The crowd erupted into applause, moved by her vulnerability and courage. Tears streamed down the faces of some attendees while others clapped fervently, inspired by her resolve. When Mildred returned to her seat, Tommy stepped up to lighten the mood. With his trademark humor, he joked about his clumsiness during training exercises and shared lighthearted anecdotes from their time in the service. But beneath the laughter lay a deeper message. Friendship transcends differences, and laughter is a powerful weapon against despair. Finally, Harold closed the evening with a call to action. "We're not asking you to solve racism overnight," he said, his deep voice echoing through the room. "But we are asking you to try. Speak up when you see injustice. Stand beside your neighbors no matter who they are, and never forget that silence is complicity." By the time the meeting ended, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Attendees lingered, shaking hands with the veterans and thanking them for their bravery. Several residents approached Mildred personally, apologizing for not intervening during the attack and vowing to do better in the future. Others promised to attend diversity workshops or volunteer with organizations promoting equality. Outside the community center, reporters surrounded the squad, eager to capture their stories for national news outlets. Jim handled the media inquiries, with grace emphasizing the importance of collective action. "This isn't just about Mildred," he told one reporter. "It's about creating a world where no one has to endure what she went through. That starts with each of us." As the night drew to a close, Mildred stood on the steps of the community center, watching as her squad mingled with newfound supporters. Despite the exhaustion etched on their faces, they radiated pride and hope. For the first time in weeks, Mildred felt a glimmer of peace. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. With her squad by her side, and an entire community beginning to wake up to the realities of racism, Mildred believed that change was possible. After all, history had taught her one thing: even in the darkest times, light could shine through when people came together. And tonight, that light burned brighter than ever. The days following the community meeting were a whirlwind of activity. The story of Mildred Johnson and her squad began to spread far beyond the quiet suburb where it had started. Local newspapers published articles detailing the attack, the veterans' intervention, and the powerful message delivered at the community center. Television crews arrived, eager to interview the heroes who had stepped forward to combat racism in such a bold and inspiring way. Social media platforms lit up with posts about Mildred's courage and the unwavering support of her squad. Hashtags, like I Stand With Mildred and Conscious Justice for All, trended nationwide, sparking conversations about prejudice, accountability, and unity. Despite the sudden fame, Mildred remained grounded. She continued her daily routines, tending to her garden, reading books, and occasionally chatting with neighbors. But now, those interactions carried a new weight. People approached her differently, their eyes filled with admiration and respect. Some even apologized for not standing up during the attack, promising to do better in the future. Mildred accepted these gestures graciously, though she couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Why had it taken something so extreme to wake people up? Still, she chose to focus on the positive. Change was happening, however small or slow it might seem. Meanwhile, the police investigation into the attack intensified. The evidence gathered by Mildred's squad proved invaluable. Descriptions of the attackers, witness statements from neighbors, and surveillance footage from nearby businesses helped narrow down the suspects. Within days, officers identified the culprits, a group of young men known for their troublemaking behavior in the area. Arrest warrants were issued and a manhunt ensued. When news of the arrests broke, the community reacted with mixed emotions. Many felt relief that justice was being served, while others expressed anger that such hatred existed in their midst. A few vocal critics argued that the punishments should fit the crime, calling for harsh consequences to send a clear message. Others worried about the long-term impact on the young men, suggesting rehabilitation programs as part of their sentences. Amidst the debate, one thing was certain: the incident had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about prejudice and privilege. Back at Mildred's house, the squad celebrated the progress with cautious optimism. They gathered around her kitchen table once again, sharing updates and discussing next steps. Jim leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "This is just the beginning," he said, tapping his cane against the floor for emphasis. "Catching these guys is important, but it won't solve the bigger problem. We need to keep pushing for change, not just here, but everywhere." Maria nodded in agreement. "Education is key. People don't understand history because they haven't lived it. Maybe we can use our stories to teach them." Harold chuckled dryly. "Yeah, scare 'em straight with tales of boot camp and battlefield horrors." Tommy grinned, always quick, with a joke. "Or we could make a movie. Hollywood loves a good underdog story." Though their banter lightened the mood, there was no denying the seriousness of their mission. Over the next few weeks, the squad expanded their efforts beyond the neighborhood. Maria reached out to local schools, offering to give presentations about her experiences as a medic during the war. Her talks resonated deeply with students, many of whom had never met someone who had lived through such tumultuous times. She spoke candidly about the challenges she faced as a Latina woman in a male-dominated field, emphasizing the importance of perseverance and allyship. Harold took a different approach, partnering with vocational training programs to mentor young mechanics. He saw potential in these kids, many of whom came from disadvantaged backgrounds. Through hands-on workshops and heartfelt conversations, he taught them valuable skills, while also imparting life lessons about integrity and hard work. "You don't have to be perfect," he often told them. Just be decent. Treat people the way you'd want to be treated. Tommy focused on building bridges within the community. He organized informal gatherings at the local park, inviting residents of all ages and backgrounds to come together for games, music, and food. These events fostered connections and encouraged open dialogue, breaking down barriers that had long divided the neighborhood. At one picnic, Tommy introduced an elderly white veteran to a teenage black boy who dreamed of joining the military. Watching them bond over shared interests reminded everyone present of the power of human connection. Jim, meanwhile, became a liaison between the squad and local authorities. He attended city council meetings, advocating for policies that promoted diversity and inclusion. His military background lent credibility to his arguments, and his passion inspired others to take action. When a proposal for mandatory anti-bias training for law enforcement officers came up for a vote, Jim stood before the council and delivered a stirring speech. "Prejudice isn't born, it's taught," he declared, "and if we don't unteach it, we'll keep repeating the same mistakes. Let's start today." Mildred played a central role in these initiatives, though she preferred to stay behind the scenes. She offered advice when needed, provided moral support, and occasionally accompanied her squad to events. But mostly, she focused on healing, both physically and emotionally. The attack had left scars, both visible and invisible, and it would take time for them to fade. Still, she found solace in knowing that her pain had sparked something meaningful. Every time someone thanked her for speaking out or credited her squad with inspiring change, she felt a little stronger. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of their efforts became evident. Attendance at community meetings increased, with residents actively participating in discussions about race relations and social justice. Local businesses began implementing diversity initiatives. Hiring practices shifted to prioritize inclusivity, and schools incorporated more comprehensive history lessons into their curriculums. Even the police department underwent reforms, adopting stricter protocols for handling hate crimes and fostering better relationships with marginalized communities. But perhaps the most profound transformation occurred within individuals. Neighbors who had once ignored Mildred now greeted her warmly, going out of their way to offer assistance. Children who had learned about her story through school programs wrote letters thanking her for her bravery. Strangers stopped her on the street to share how her example had inspired them to stand up against injustice in their own lives. Each interaction reinforced what Mildred already knew. Small actions could lead to big changes. One crisp autumn afternoon, Mildred sat on her porch sipping tea and watching leaves dance in the breeze. Her squad had returned to their respective homes, but their presence lingered in her heart. She thought about everything that had transpired, the attack, the fear, the fight for justice, and marveled at how far they had come. It wasn't perfect, of course. Racism still existed, hatred still festered, and the road ahead remained uncertain. Yet for the first time in a long time, Mildred felt hopeful. Her gaze drifted to the photograph hanging on her living room wall, the one of her squad from World War II. In that moment, she realized something profound. Their bond hadn't weakened with age. If anything, it had grown stronger. Together, they had proven that courage wasn't confined to battlefields or uniforms. It lived in everyday acts of kindness, in standing up for what was right, and in refusing to let hate win. Mildred smiled softly, raising her teacup in a silent toast. To her squad, to resilience, to hope, and to the belief that, no matter how dark the world seemed, light would always find a way to shine through. As winter approached, Mildred's neighborhood transformed into a tapestry of twinkling lights and festive decorations. The air grew crisp, carrying the scent of pine and cinnamon. Despite the cheerful atmosphere, Mildred couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that fateful day months ago. What had once been a quiet, unremarkable suburb was now a hub of activism and awareness. People who had previously kept to themselves were now actively engaging in discussions about equality, justice, and community building. And at the center of it all stood Mildred, the 78-year-old veteran whose courage had ignited a movement. The attackers, 3 young men identified as leaders of the group had been formally charged with hate crimes in addition to assault. Their trial became a focal point for national conversations about racism and accountability. Journalists flocked to the courthouse daily, capturing footage of protesters holding signs that read, "No hate, no fear, and justice for Mildred." Inside the courtroom, Mildred sat stoically alongside her squad, their presence a testament to solidarity and resilience. Though she felt no joy in seeing the young men face consequences, she understood the importance of accountability. This wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing, it was about setting an example for future generations. During the trial, Mildred took the stand to recount her experience. Her voice trembled slightly as she described the attack, the jeers, the shove the spilled groceries, but her words carried undeniable strength. She spoke not out of anger, but out of hope. Hope that sharing her story might prevent others from enduring similar pain. When the prosecutor asked her why she had chosen to fight back instead of retreating into silence, Mildred paused, her gaze steady. "Because hate thrives in silence," she said firmly, "and I've spent my life learning that silence is never the answer." Her testimony left the courtroom in stunned silence, followed by murmurs of admiration. Even the judge seemed visibly moved, nodding solemnly as he scribbled notes. By the end of the proceedings, the defendants were found guilty on multiple counts. While some argued that the sentences weren't harsh enough, others saw value in the mandatory counseling and community service components of their punishment. It was clear that the case had sparked reflection, not just among those directly involved, but across society as a whole. In the aftermath of the verdict, Mildred received invitations from organizations nationwide asking her to speak at rallies, conferences, and educational events. At first, she declined most of them, feeling overwhelmed by the attention. But her squad encouraged her to embrace the opportunity. "You're not just representing yourself," Jim told her one evening over the phone. "You're representing everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Your voice matters." With their support, Mildred agreed to accept a few select engagements. Her first major appearance was at a university symposium on racial justice. Standing before hundreds of students, faculty members, and activists, she shared her journey, from enlisting in the Army during a time when segregation was still rampant, to facing discrimination both abroad and at home, to surviving the recent attack. She didn't shy away from discussing the pain and fear she had felt, but she also emphasized the power of resilience and unity. "I'm not special," she said near the end of her speech. "I'm just someone who refused to let hate win. Each of you has that same power within you. You don't have to be loud or famous to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is standing up for what's right, even when it's hard." The audience erupted into applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Students lined up afterward to thank her, many tearfully expressing how her words had inspired them to take action in their own lives. One young woman handed Mildred a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for reminding me that we can create change. I won't stay silent anymore." Word of Mildred's impact continued to spread. National news outlets featured her story, highlighting not only her bravery, but also the efforts of her squad. They were hailed as symbols of intergenerational activism, proving that age was no barrier to making a difference. Invitations poured in from talk shows, nonprofit organizations, and even government bodies seeking advice on combating systemic racism. Though Mildred remained humble, deflecting praise onto her squad and community, she began to see herself differently. She wasn't just a retired nurse or a wartime veteran, she was a beacon of hope. Back home, Mildred's neighbors rallied around her, ensuring she never felt alone in her newfound role. Those who had once turned a blind eye during the attack now went out of their way to show kindness. A group of teenagers organized a cleanup crew to maintain her garden after noticing she struggled with the colder weather. An elderly couple invited her over for dinner every Sunday, eager to hear more about her experiences. Even local businesses contributed, offering discounts or free services to express gratitude for her courage. Despite the outpouring of support, Mildred remained grounded. She knew that fame was fleeting, and true change required consistent effort. With her squad's guidance, she established a foundation aimed at promoting education and empathy, named Courage Through Unity. The organization provided resources for schools, hosted workshops on diversity, and offered grants to individuals working towards social justice. Maria spearheaded fundraising efforts while Harold used his connections to secure sponsorships. Tommy designed promotional materials, infusing humor into campaigns to keep spirits high. Jim served as the foundation's figurehead, leveraging his military credentials to garner trust and credibility. One of the foundation's first projects was creating a traveling exhibit featuring artifacts and stories from World War II veterans of diverse backgrounds. The goal was simple: to remind people of the sacrifices made by those who fought for freedom and the values they stood for. The exhibit debuted at a downtown museum, drawing large crowds and earning rave reviews. Visitors marveled at photographs, letters, and uniforms displayed alongside personal narratives. Many lingered in front of Mildred's section, where a photo of her younger self in uniform hung beside a plaque inscribed with her favorite quote, "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." As the exhibit traveled to other cities, its message resonated deeply. Schools incorporated visits into their history lessons, prompting students to research lesser-known heroes of the war. Families brought grandparents to reminisce about their own experiences, bridging generational gaps. Veterans attended opening ceremonies, sharing their stories with renewed pride. For Mildred, watching the exhibit inspire so many reinforced her belief in the power of storytelling. History wasn't just something to be remembered, it was something to be lived and learned from. Throughout this whirlwind of activity, Mildred's bond with her squad deepened. Though separated by distance, they stayed connected through regular phone calls and video chats. They celebrated milestones together, mourned losses, and offered unwavering encouragement. When Maria fell ill briefly, Mildred flew to New Mexico to care for her, refusing to let her friend face illness alone. Similarly, when Harold's shop suffered damage during a storm, Tommy and Jim coordinated repairs, ensuring he could reopen quickly. Their friendship transcended decades, proving that loyalty and love endure even the toughest trials. By spring, Mildred's foundation had gained significant traction. Donations poured in, enabling them to expand their reach. They partnered with law enforcement agencies to implement anti-bias training programs, collaborated with local artists to create murals celebrating diversity, and launched a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in social work or advocacy. Each project bore the imprint of Mildred's philosophy: progress requires patience, persistence, and partnership. Yet, amidst the accolades and achievements, Mildred never lost sight of what truly mattered. Every evening she returned to her cozy home, lit a fire in the hearth, and reflected on the day's events. She thought about the young men who had attacked her, wondering if they would emerge from their ordeal with a newfound understanding of compassion. She thought about her squad, marveling at how fate had brought them back together after so many years. And she thought about the countless others fighting similar battles, hoping her story might offer them strength. One night, as snowflakes drifted lazily outside her window, Mildred picked up an old journal she hadn't written in for years. Flipping through its pages, she found entries detailing moments of triumph and heartache, dreams realized and deferred. On a blank page, she jotted down a single sentence: "The world is better because we dared to care." It wasn't poetry or prose, it was truth. And in that truth lay the essence of everything she and her squad had accomplished. Mildred closed the journal and placed it gently on her nightstand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of peace, knowing that she had done her part, and that together with her squad she had helped light a path toward a brighter future. By the summer, Mildred's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The quiet solitude she once cherished was now replaced by a whirlwind of activity. Her days were filled with interviews, speaking engagements, and meetings, with leaders from various organizations eager to collaborate with her foundation, Courage Through Unity. Yet, despite the busyness, Mildred found joy in the work. Every invitation, every handshake, every shared story reminded her that her voice mattered, that her experiences could inspire others to act with kindness and courage. The foundation continued to grow, its impact rippling across communities nationwide. Schools adopted its curriculum on diversity and inclusion, teaching students not only about historical injustices, but also about the importance of empathy and allyship. Local governments partnered with the foundation to implement anti-discrimination policies while businesses sought guidance on creating more inclusive workplaces. Even small towns far removed from Mildred's suburban neighborhood began organizing events inspired by her message. It was as if a spark had been lit, igniting a collective desire for change. One particularly memorable event took place in a rural town in the Midwest. A group of high school students, inspired by Mildred's story, organized a Unity Day festival. They invited Mildred to attend, promising her a warm welcome. Though hesitant at first, traveling long distances wasn't easy at her age. She agreed after some persuasion from her squad. Jim accompanied her, insisting he wouldn't miss the chance to see firsthand how deeply her influence had spread. When they arrived, Mildred was overwhelmed by the turnout. Hundreds of people packed the town square, their faces glowing with excitement. Booths lined the streets, showcasing art, music, and food from diverse cultures. Children ran around wearing t-shirts printed with messages like, "Be kind," and "We are one." At the center of it all stood a stage, where a group of students performed skits highlighting themes of acceptance and understanding. As Mildred walked through the crowd, strangers approached her to express gratitude, some even breaking into tears as they hugged her tightly. When it was time for her to speak, Mildred stepped onto the stage, her heart swelling with emotion. She looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, black and white, rich and poor, and felt an overwhelming sense of hope. "I didn't come here to tell you what to do," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I came here to remind you of something you already know. We're stronger together. When we choose love over hate, compassion over indifference, and action over silence, we create a world worth living in." Her words resonated deeply, earning thunderous applause. Afterward, a line formed as people waited patiently to thank her or share their own stories. One woman handed Mildred a framed painting of a garden in full bloom. "This is for you," she said softly. "It reminded me of your strength and beauty." Mildred accepted the gift with tears in her eyes, touched by the gesture. Back home, Mildred found solace in the simple pleasures she had always loved, tending to her garden, sipping tea on her porch, and flipping through old photo albums. These moments of quiet reflection allowed her to process everything that had happened. She thought about the young men who had attacked her, wondering if they had begun to understand the weight of their actions. Reports indicated they were making progress in their rehabilitation programs, learning to confront their biases and prejudices. While forgiveness didn't come easily, Mildred believed in second chances. If anyone deserved redemption, it was those willing to change. Her squad remained a constant source of support, checking in regularly and offering advice whenever needed. Maria called weekly, updating Mildred on fundraising efforts and sharing stories from schools using the foundation's materials. Harold sent care packages filled with homemade treats, along with updates on his shop's involvement in community projects. Tommy mailed funny postcards from his travels, each one decorated with doodles and jokes designed to make her laugh. And Jim visited whenever possible, bringing news of upcoming initiatives and ensuring she didn't feel overwhelmed by her growing responsibilities. Despite the challenges, Mildred never doubted her decision to step into the spotlight. She knew the fight against racism and hatred would continue long after she was gone, but she also knew she had planted seeds that would grow into something greater. Each person she inspired, each policy she influenced, each act of kindness sparked by her example, carried the potential to create lasting change. In late summer, Mildred received an unexpected letter from one of the young men who had attacked her. It was short and handwritten, the penmanship shaky but sincere. "Dear Ms. Johnson, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I'm sorry. What I did was wrong, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about why I acted that way. I realize now that my ignorance hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Thank you for showing me there's another way. I promise to do better." Mildred read the letter several times, her emotions shifting between anger, sadness, and finally cautious optimism. She showed it to Jim, who nodded thoughtfully. "This is progress," he said. "Not just for him, but for everyone watching." As autumn approached, Mildred decided to host a small gathering at her home to celebrate the Foundation's achievements. She invited her squad, close friends, and a few neighbors who had supported her throughout the journey. Together, they sat around her backyard fire pit, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories under a canopy of stars. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of burning wood and fallen leaves. Jim raised his mug of hot chocolate in a toast. "To Mildred," he said, his voice gruff but warm, "for reminding us that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about standing up anyway." Maria chimed in, her eyes twinkling. "And to our squad, for proving that no matter how much time passes, we're still unstoppable." Harold grinned, holding up his mug. "Here's to justice, unity, and a whole lot of stubbornness." Tommy laughed, adding, "And to Mildred's killer cookies, because nothing brings people together like dessert." Everyone joined in the laughter, the sound echoing through the night. Mildred smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had faced unimaginable pain, but she had also discovered unimaginable strength in herself, in her squad, and in the community that had rallied around her. As the fire crackled and sparks danced toward the sky, Mildred leaned back in her chair, gazing at the stars. She thought about the road ahead, long and uncertain yet full of possibility. Racism wouldn't disappear overnight, and hatred would always find new forms. But she believed in the power of love, resilience, and collective action. Together, they had proven that even in the darkest times, light could shine through. That night, as Mildred drifted off to sleep, she felt at peace. Her journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. She had fought, not with weapons or anger, but with courage, compassion, and unwavering determination. And though her story might fade with time, its legacy would endure in the hearts of those she had touched. For Mildred Johnson, that was enough.